Hey there, and welcome to this video on investing in a chaotic world. Now, boy, has the world become chaotic. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. You look around the world in the last 2 to 3 years and think, wow, it's really changed. Obviously, we've had COVID, we've had natural disasters. We now got very high inflation in many countries around the world, particularly in the Western world for the first time in quite a long time. And of course, war. And that has a lot of dangers, obviously a tragedy in and of itself, but has a lot of potential dangers to the world economy, and of course to the future if it gets worse and gets out of control. But what I want to talk about briefly today is investing in a chaotic world. How do you do it? Is there still opportunities? And what are the issues that we need to think through? This is going to be part of a webinar that we're doing in a week or two. So that's going to be launched, I think it's around the 30th of March. If you can't make it, no problem. It'll be on our website at wealthwithpurpose.com. But as I say, what I want to do is talk about how to invest in a chaotic world. Now, one of the things that most people feel when they see this environment is they feel that the future is uncertain. Well, let me dispel any myths here. The future has always been uncertain. It's just that when we're in good times and prosperity, we tend not to think about it. We tend to think the future will continue like that. When we're in tough times, we tend to think that those tough times have made the world uncertain and that we don't know the future. When in reality, we've never known the future. Okay, it's always been uncertain. And of course, certainly in the Western world, it's been getting darker, I think, at a very accelerated pace in recent years. Lots of horrible laws going through our parliaments around the world, in Western world, that are very anti-God. And I think there'll be a lot of long-term consequences of those and have a big impact on our society and so forth. But when you are in this sort of environment where people, as I say, feel uncertain, the principles remain the same. And of course, the Bible talks to us a lot about investing. People don't think of it obviously as an investment manual, but the good news is there's lots of fantastic principles that we can glean from it. So I want to touch on those. The other thing is, can you still make money in this environment? Is it still possible? Now, it's certainly the toughest I've seen in my adult life. You've got interest rates very low around the world, depends which country, and obviously, but interest rates are extremely low. So very hard to make money on cash. In fact, cash is really a negative rate of return. You look at bonds, it's very similar. Then you've got property and shares, which for the most part are extremely overvalued. That is, they look very expensive and therefore they're risky in the sense that they could lose value over time, particularly if interest rates rise significantly. But here's the thing, investments are cyclical. So at any point in time, there's some investments that will do really well, some investments that'll do poorly. And of course, there's a whole gamut of things we can invest in, whether it's, let's say, cash and bonds, there's shares, there's property, there's alternative assets like precious metals and agriculture and all sorts of things. And in fact, my favorite investment is actually just small business. If you want to make great wealth, and if you think about wealth in society, it's usually through small businesses that have grown and become big businesses. That's where wealth is actually created, and that's an important concept to think about when you're buying a share or anything like that. You think to yourself, is this a business that's going to grow? Is it a great business? And that's important to think through. So there's always opportunities to make money. Now, of course, the purpose of the Christian life is not to make money; it's to advance God's kingdom, to glorify God with our money. And so we want to do that in very much the way we handle our money. So what's the Bible say about investing? Well, there's a couple of principles that I want to touch on. First is my favorite in Ecclesiastes 11 verse 2, which says, invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8, because you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. Now, you look around the world, and depending where you are, it may feel like a disaster. There's certainly been natural disasters in my home country of Australia, as well as obviously around the world. And if you're in some parts of the world that are subject to war, then you'd very much feel like that. But the Bible tells us to diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So that's the first one. In Luke 14:28, Jesus, and these are Jesus' words, he says, you've got a plan. He said, who, when they sit down to build a tower, doesn't first count the cost. So when you're investing, you've actually got a plan. You've got to think it through and plan it out. Great passage in 1 Kings 7:10 is talking about laying foundations, and that the foundations of this particular building were made out of, it was out of marble and high quality stone. And the point being is that you've got to invest in quality. Okay, that's the next principle. The fourth one, get advice. Proverbs says there's wisdom in many counselors. So, you can talk to a professional financial advisor, someone like me, or you could talk to those who have had a genuine track record of investing money well. And you can find that out. Obviously, be careful who you talk to. A lot of people will only tell you their successes, not their losses. And so you've got to be understanding that. Of course, investing requires patience too. When people invest, they expect it to go up the next day, and often it may go down for quite some time. So you've got to be patient. Very, very important thing here. If you're married, I'd encourage you to involve your spouse. And you might say to me, Alex, but my spouse has got no idea about money. They're just not interested. Well, all the more reason to get them involved. A, so they learn, and B, because often, God puts us with a spouse as a sounding board and as someone who often will have a sixth sense about what's going on. If they're very they're mature believer, they might be hearing from God as to how He thinks that you should be handling your finances. So very important to involve your spouse if you are talking about investing, and if you're married, of course. Now, of course, in tough times like this, one of the questions that gets asked is, should you alter your existing investments? Now you've got retirement money and things like that. Should you alter your investments? Well, the reality is it comes down to a range of factors. One is, what is your time frame? If someone is 65 and they're going into retirement, there's a risk we call sequencing risk, and that is the risk that you get very poor returns early on in your retirement. And of course, that can then shave years off your retirement down the track. So someone who's at that age needs to probably take a little less risk than someone who's, say, 25, who, if the share market crashes tomorrow, well, so what? It doesn't affect your life. Your savings are there for the long term, and so forth. So age will affect it. Of course, the way we manage money for clients is we adopt what we call a bucket-based system. We think of your money in buckets. So you've got a cash bucket, a short-term, medium-term, and long-term bucket. And really that's about saying, what goals does somebody have? It could be buying a car in a few years, a holiday in 12 months, saving for retirement in 20 years. And we invest your capital according to when you need the money back, okay? Because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal of investing is making sure you get a reasonable rate of return. But it's also making sure you have the money there when you need it for when that goal falls due. And that's how we therefore have to juggle the money to make sure that we create a reasonable degree of certainty that the money will be there when that goal, when that goal falls due. So that's some initial principles there around should you alter at the moment. So we'll cover more of these in our webinar that we've got coming up in a week or two's time. Of course, some of the common mistakes that people make in this, they sell after the crash. Now, at the moment, the stock markets are down. At the time of writing this video, the markets are only down a little bit. They're not crashed per se, but they are very expensive still. So they are riskier in my view. But of course, the other thing here is don't let fear rule your decisions. Okay, you've got to treat investing as a long-term thing, and don't be tossed around by what you see in the media. So much is hyped up. So much of it is often untrue. And of course, you can't let fear drive your decision making. It will cloud your thinking, and the devil wants to have us living in fear, which makes us generally very ineffectual. As a Christian, we should be focusing on what God is doing, not what the devil is doing. Okay, and so we should be looking forward positively and trusting in God that He's going to provide for us, irrespective of what goes on around the world. So very important to think through these issues as you're talking about wealth creation and investing in this sort of chaotic environment that we're in. It's not going to get any better, I don't think, not at least for maybe a long time. The reality is that the world is getting more unstable. The debt levels across the world have risen dramatically over the last 50 years. The Western world, in my view, most of the citizens are drowning in debt. In Australia, where I'm from, it's the second most indebted households on earth. And the big risk factor, and here's what the Bible warns about, it says the rich rules over the poor and the borrower becomes the slave of the lender. So the big risk is that as interest rates rise to fight back against inflation, many people get wiped out. They lose their home because they can't service their home loan anymore. So these are the kinds of risks that are going on out there and so forth. But as I say, there's always opportunities in these environments. And of course, there are always good strategies to look at. So jump on our webinar. As I say, if you can't make our webinar on investing in a chaotic world in a week or so, make sure you access the recording off our website. It'll be up on the website in the not too distant future. So anyway, I hope that little short sort of video just to give you insight into the environment and how you can do it. There's those few little tips there. I hope that was of benefit to you. God bless you and see you soon.